Hey, 7th graders! Today we are going to be working on simple, compound, and complex sentences in our station work. I'm going to go over your cheat sheet with you, and this is going to help you kind of define some of the necessary words and terms that we will need today. And you will have access to this cheat sheet in your partners or on your own. So make sure that you are following along with this sheet as I go through with the video. So the first thing that we need to define is a simple sentence, right? So that just means it's a sentence with one subject, one verb, right? It's also called an independent clause. So anytime you hear the word independent clause or simple sentence, know that they mean the exact same thing. So we're going to use the term independent clause later, but I'm going to remind you that it's just basically a simple sentence. So right here, now if we look, follow my mouse, the dog looked out the window. This is a simple sentence. There's one subject, right? The dog is our noun, and then he is looking out the window. And that's our verb. The verb is just the action that's happening, right? You could say something like, Ms. Decker kicked the soccer ball, right? Ms. Decker is the subject. The soccer ball, or the kicking, is the verb. So it's the action. So a simple sentence is just a subject and a verb, right? And making sure that it's a complete sentence. So it has to be a complete sentence. It just can't say Ms. Decker and the soccer ball or Ms. Decker kicked, right? We have to know what that action is being made towards. So again, an independent clause and a simple sentence are the same thing. One subject, one verb. Now, a compound sentence is two independent clauses that are put together, and you use a coordinating conjunction to put them together. We're going to talk about what that means in just a second. But reminder, two independent clauses just means it's two independent or two simple sentences that are put together with a conjunction. Right? So an example would be, the dog looked out the window. So here, follow my mouse. The dog looked out the window, but John's car was nowhere in sight. So now, if I look at the dog looked out the window, that's a simple sentence on its own. If I take out the word but, John's car was nowhere in sight, is also an independent clause. It's a simple sentence, right? So when I add this coordinating conjunction, this, right, the word but, it now creates one compound sentence. Okay, and make sure you add your comma, it's kind of hard to see here, right, after the end of your first independent clause. So now if we get to talk about coordinating conjunction, so but would be an example, but there are also several others. And the best way to remember this is the acronym FANBOYS. If you see FANBOYS spells out FANBOYS, and so they stand for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And so these are going to be the coordinating conjunctions that are used to combine two simple sentences or two independent clauses to create that compound sentence. So if you see one of those, look for it, right? Find it, and then see if the clause afterwards makes sense on its own, and the one before it makes sense on its own, then we know it's a compound sentence. And then lastly, we have our complex sentences. And this means one independent clause, right, which is a simple sentence, and one dependent clause is joined together. A dependent clause is a phrase. It's not a full sentence, and it often begins with a subordinating conjunction. So we're going to talk about what that is here in just one second. So basically, if I'm over here, an example of a complex sentence would be, the dog looked out the window, right? Okay, I'm checking. That can stand on its own, right? It's a sentence. As if he was waiting for John's car to pull up in the driveway. So now here is my dependent clause. As if he was waiting for John's car to pull up in the driveway is not a complete sentence. So I know it has to be a dependent clause. So now when I put them together, I know that it's not a compound sentence anymore. It's a complex sentence, because both sentences can't stand on their own. Only one gets to be by itself, right? The dog looked out the window is the only part that can be on its own. As if he was waiting for John's car to pull up in the driveway, right? That's not a complete sentence. So it is, and it starts with a subordinating conjunction, and I'm going to show you some examples here in a second. So the definition of a dependent clause, right, we just talked about, begins with a subordinating conjunction and cannot stand on its own. We just went over this. So here are some examples. Right? These are used to introduce those dependent clauses. So after, although, as if, as long as though, because, before, even if, even, right? I don't have to go over all of them. So this is a really great way to show, a really great way for you to look at sentences and say, okay, do I see these words as a start of kind of the second half of a sentence? Does it become a dependent clause? Just because the word after is in a sentence doesn't automatically mean that it has a dependent clause, right? You have to make sure you know where it's placed. Oops, ignore that. And if it is in the correct spot, if it doesn't make sense for the sentence to stand on its own. So again, just because you see these words in a sentence doesn't automatically mean it's complex. You have to make sure they're in the correct spots, right? And really analyzing that sentence. So after you've watched this video, go to the next step in your station work.